All right, all right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Joel Bork, host here at the IronNet Cyber Lookback series. With me today are two fantastic gentlemen. They're extremely intelligent about all things cyber, and more importantly, you get to join us today to pick the minds of these individuals. With me is Joey Fitzpatrick and Peter Rudzinski, both the threat analysis team lead and one of our core threat analysis members. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Joel. Thanks for having us, Joel.
In case spelling Rudzinski is difficult for anybody, I wanted to throw this slide up on the screen. Please, please, please reach out to these gentlemen even afterwards. Our names are there. LinkedIn is the kind of the core place to reach out, but reach out, send us a message, connect with us. We would love to have discussions about any topics that you found interesting during this presentation or even after. Happy to answer any questions. So without further ado, are you gentlemen ready to jump right in?
Let's do it. Got it.
All right, perfect. So the first topic for September Cyber Lookback is a really interesting one. And this was about a flaw in medical devices. I'm going to kick this over to Peter. Peter, talk to me about how hackers could actually kill people using this flaw.
Yeah, I think that's really the most important gripping headline here, and so that's probably the most dramatic part of this article, and everything else is actually a little bit more mundane. But obviously, the impact here is the critical piece. So, what you're referring to is a set of vulnerabilities that were discovered in B Braun's Infusomat space large volume pumps, as well as their space station management stack. So basically what this is people's insulin pumps that provide insulin based on their blood sugar. There is a central management stack that is typically deployed back into a hospital, and then that central management stack is actually what's controlling and monitoring the delivery of insulin. And what you can hear there is, if you read between the lines, is what has happened in the last few years is developers and service providers have attempted to make things more convenient for both the healthcare professionals who have to administer this, but also for the person receiving healthcare, such that they don't have to go into the doctor all the time. If an issue arises, it's discovered at the central management location. There's all sorts of different advantages to this particular implementation. But what that requires is lots of interconnectivity, which, as we know, exposes your attack surface greatly. So what has happened here is McAfee has gone in and performed some great research around vulnerabilities in that space station that I was talking about, that central management stack. And then from there, they were able to actually communicate directly with some of these medical infusion pumps or infusomat pumps that then deliver the insulin. And through that exploitation, they're able to adjust the volume of a particular medicine that's being provided to the end patient. So as you mentioned, Joel, in certain cases, if applied incorrectly, this could be very, very dangerous for a patient particularly.
Can we talk about attack vector? So, you have a lot of these really critical vulnerabilities, and it's like, you need physical device access. I don't believe this was the case on this one. I think you just needed remote access into their network. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So, I mean, and this is kind of where the error in this story kind of deflates a little bit, is that what is required here is not actually like proximity to the device itself. There is no discovery of a vulnerability in like the communication mechanism to the device itself, insofar that like you can remotely remotely exploit this attack. But what really you can do is, if you had access into the medical provider's network, so that's the hospital or whoever this primary care provider or whatever it is, if you had access into that network, you could take advantage of a very trivial exploit to get access into the space station, and from the space station, at that point, you could make unauthenticated, erroneous execution commands to the pumps to then deliver additional or even less insulin than is desired.
No, really, really good explanation, Peter. Thank you so much. And I mean, this comes back to saying, okay, you have a lot of people starting to isolate devices like this again, right? I mean, you're saying, sure, okay, if somebody has access to my network and they can do unauthenticated, erroneous calls over to these devices, how do we begin protecting these, Peter?
Yeah, I mean, well, personally, I think there a couple of things should be noted here. It's funny. I recently noticed a article that came out of Pwn to Own, where a group of researchers actually documented their process in how they exploited a Zoom vulnerability, or I should say, discovered a Zoom vulnerability and successfully exploited it at the Pwn to Own competition to gain, essentially remote code execution. And it was just something remarkable to me walking through that deep dive on their thought process and processes, because for me, it just really clearly demonstrated this principle of it's not if, but when. If you really have a motivated attacker who has enough financial incentive or even time, it's going to happen. You're going to find vulnerabilities. There will be exploits. It's basically a principle of the way that everything operates within our interconnected spaces. So personally, my takeaway from this is, firstly, the company did not respond very well, in my opinion. They actually responded with, this is an unrealistic attack. It would be very difficult to do and all that. And yes, that's true. But the point is not that. The point is that you need to do better at patching these trivial bugs that allow access into very sensitive systems that have people's lives in their hands. So that's number one. But then number two is, I think we also need to take a hard look at how much convenience we want to add to these systems versus how much risk that incurs, and then sort of the damage that then could happen. So, there needs to be a strong risk calculus here of like, what's the likelihood versus impact of something, someone taking advantage of these systems that we've built to be interconnected, and maybe is it better if we instead do something that is maybe less convenient but less likely to be attacked and exploited like this. I don't want to say anything with regard to this particular case. I'm not arguing that this is something that should be removed or destroyed and we should walk back, but I do think we want to have a hard look at how much we expose for convenience versus how much we lock down for safety.
Well, and I think you made some really, really good points, and I kind of in my head was thinking about an example that I had this week where we're looking at creating like whitelists. Like what are things we should expect in an environment, right? And as we're creating these whitelists, we were thinking, what are the potential attack vectors that could abuse this approved connection, right? And so similarly thinking to this example is, let's say a very high profile individual gets sick or ill, right? And is in the hospital, and staff is around, and there's a picture taken of that individual in the hospital bed connected to these devices. And there is some, because you got to think like, okay, there's no financial gain to exploiting a pump, right? So then you have these threat actors who they would have to be very, very encouraged to go after a certain individual. And they would be looking up the medical devices next to their bedside, and then that would be the attack factor. So that's what I see as the threat vector into this. And yes, it may be unrealistic for most people, but it's that one use case where it could happen.
Sure.
Right. So really, really interesting. So Peter, thank you. Any closing thoughts on this one, Joey?
No, I totally agree with everything you guys have said so far. Part of me is like, I'm very excited for the future of medical devices where things are becoming more connected. And I think there's a lot of benefit and data points we can gain from that. But exactly what you both outlined is that it's that one time that happens, right? And how are we, as a cybersecurity community, as the medical community, going to band together to create a solution here?
Yeah, and I love it. So let's kind of, I'm going to take that, and it's, Joey, it's almost like you saw my slides or something. Let's jump into this one. So I think it was their date, August 25th. So is that a week ago or a week and a half ago? The White House made a release saying that, hey, we're working with private sector leaders to announce ambitious initiatives to bolster the nation's cybersecurity. And a few of those I've kind of listed out here is that they want to develop a NIST framework for improving technology supply chain. So this is around a lot of open source items, but I have a feeling this will impact supply chain in general, right? I mean, you got to think medical devices, a lot of that's proprietary stuff, but they use a lot of software that is in the technical supply chain that is open source. And then a few of the other things they talked about was industrial control systems and natural gas pipeline cybersecurity initiatives, along with a number of large organizations, each making their own commitments to improve national cybersecurity. So I want to leave this up for 1 second and kick it back over to you, Joey. Joey, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I feel like every time the government has come out and says, hey, we need a partnership either on a new framework, or we need to partner with, private sector on collaborating on IOCs. I feel like this happens a lot and everyone bands together and we move forward, but then it kind of falls flat within a year. And so not to be a cynicist, but I'm very excited to see in the future. I do hope that we are going to move forward and this is going to happen. But the cynicist in me says, again, that I don't know, right? What is the financial gain for both the private sector to actually be serious, move forward on this with the government, right?
You're right, 100%. So I think we're allowed to be skeptical, right? Based on those thoughts you shared, Joey. I think one of the other interesting things that I saw was the Amazon's, one of their contributions to this was that their internal security awareness training, they're making it public for free. So we are seeing steps to, hey, let's educate the whole population, right? Not just our cybersecurity folks, our internal folks. So really good stuff. So as we talk about supply chain and kind of bolstering that supply chain, what we've seen in the past and moving forward is that ransomware is targeting this, heavily targeting the supply chain, right? Now, we're also seeing a resurgence. So I want to kick it over to Peter. Peter, talk to me about this resurgence of ransomware as is not just impacting the supply chain, but organizations around the world.
Yeah, sure. I think resurgence may be almost a misnomer, because it seemed like we were going to have a little bit more of a reprieve after things like the Colonial and JBS and Kaseya hacks that brought so much scrutiny on that issue, that we saw a slight cool off period, but almost immediately we saw just again, as like you said, a resurgence, which again may be a misnomer because it really was all just sort of blended together there, which it happened so quickly. But ultimately what you're referring to is sort of the Lockbit 2.0 group that has now sort of resurfaced. So this is like the original Lockbit group coming out with a new malware and new techniques and procedures to exploit targets. And specifically, some of the remarkable things that they've done here is some like automation pieces that essentially they're using as an argument to claim that they are the fastest ransomware that's out there. And so what they're doing is actually leveraging the domain Active Directory domain information and the group policy objects to disseminate their ransomware payloads so that they don't have to go in and actually manually move laterally. I don't think this is remarkable. This is absolutely something that has happened before, but in this case, just a level of automation and the level of speed is supposedly something that people are commenting on. I really think that this is probably a slight bit of overhype just because of the prolific nature of this group. When again, this technique itself isn't that crazy, but it should still be noted by security administrators that that this is possible and that ransomware must be stopped well in advance of a payload being delivered to to target, because there's a lot of opportunities detection at the phishing stage, the initial access phishing stage. There's a lot of detections and capabilities for prevention at the lateral movement stage, and as they're gaining privileges, so as they're escalating privileges, moving into the Active Directory domain controller, gaining access and insight into the group policy objects to then disseminate ransomware. So you've got to catch it well before that, because this is just another example of how once they have that information and once they have that capability, you have seconds and minutes to stop this, and it's not an effective technique to say like, oh, we'll catch it at that stage and we'll stop the ransomware on target or using an endpoint detection and response tool or something like that. So just more ammunition for defenders to look at this as this problem must be detected well earlier in the kill chain. Seems like you're muted, Joel.
Well, and I was just saying that's really, I think that's really, really good insight into that. Now, I think there's a few other, I want to throw up this headline real quick, because that's not the only thing that makes this really interesting. But I've done some work with some organizations who have these sprawling Active Directories, right? I mean, huge Active Directories, and they have AD administrators. And the hard part is it's scope creep, right? Once they get so big, how do you rein it back in to understand exactly what's going on and which group policies are supposed to be there? And I think just kind of pulling the thread on what you said is it's something worth doing. It takes effort to manage the Active Directory, to understand the group policies, to understand whether they're being effective or they're expected or they're outdated, right? So it's something where you need your Active Directory administrators working with your cybersecurity team to gain insight into your Active Directory and those policies that are in existence. Did I capture that correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it just kind of, again, to your point, it highlights something else I wanted to bring up, which is like only tangentially related because there's only a loose connection between these two groups. But we've also heard in the recent days and weeks about the sort of lock file ransomware, which leveraged the Exchange vulnerabilities of proxy shell vulnerabilities to gain access from, again, external access immediately into a network, and then from there they're leveraging the Petit Patam Active Directory takeover, which then gives them basically domain admin on a network, and from there they have basically everything they would need to perform this group policy enumeration and dissemination of a payload. And so to your point, these are incredibly challenging spaces to operate within, and I think that we've seen in the recent weeks and months, and honestly over the last year in general, Microsoft has shifted more and more of their attention towards Azure, towards O365, and towards like cloud-based solutions that have prevented their attention on things like Exchange, which now has led to massive amounts of these exploitations. And so not only is that taking place, but we're also seeing in the last couple of days, we saw a release of the proxy token exploitation, which is just yet another example of Exchange being vulnerable. And so it again highlights this really glaring issue where I said it, I think the last time we were on, I don't think we can continue to put the blame on defenders entirely. I absolutely think we need to do better to administrate our networks, to understand our group policies, to understand our Active Directory environments. But I do not think that it is entirely fair for Microsoft to just say, nah, that is a misconfiguration. Petit Patam is a misconfiguration. If you allow for that, that's on you. No, it is a very easily configured situation that I, as a novice user or even just standard Active Directory domain administrator, I shouldn't have to be so walking on eggshells every time I'm operating within this environment, because maybe I could configure it in a way that allows for some massively detrimental domain takeover. It's just not fair. We need to have better security controls in place, better education, and better systems that do not allow for this kind of thing to happen. So yeah, this is just, again, another litany of examples of arguments as to why that is a problem and why this cannot just simply be something defenders are dealing with on their own.
Well, and so you bring up an interesting point, and we work at a startup, right? Or a startup-y. We just went public, so congratulations to all of you and anyone from IronNet on this call. We're now trading under the symbol $IRNT. Really exciting stuff. But we talk about, and this is what Microsoft's problem too, is they're trying to be a market leader, right? So they're dedicating resources to innovation, to their newest cloud products. And so there has to be, it's kind of a teeter-totter on, well, there's issues weighing on the tech debt side. When are you going to take resources from innovation and have them kind of smooth out and do documentation and clean up these older issues with older products? So it's a balancing act. It really is.
Absolutely.
Now, on that same thought, I threw up this slide a little earlier, probably too early, but does this surprise you, Peter or Joey? Lockbit gang leaks Bangkok Airways data. I mean, I think it was thousands of over 1,000 gigabytes. And then we also talked last month about it hitting Accenture customers. Does it surprise you? Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, Pete, I mean, I'm sure you're probably say something like the same answer, but no. I mean, there's no code of ethics here, right? These folks who are these ransomware gangs, right? At the end of the day, they can still, not delete your data, even if you paid for it back, and double triple extortion, and then it's just game over, right? And even if they're, claiming to say, yeah, we're not going to actually release your data, why would they not keep it, right? Those are extra data points, and maybe better for a later intrusion, and they can look like they came in differently. Maybe they can sit in your network and maintain persistence. I mean, I don't understand why you think they would. Anyone would think, not you, Joel, right? Anyone would think that you would not delete that data. So,
well, I'm going to be honest, just trying to put myself in the criminal's shoes. Like, let's put you in the criminal's shoes, Joey. Yeah. You steal this data. You've got your payment from Bangkok Airways, and somebody knows you stole that data. And if they're interested in it, they could even reach out to you. So even if you said, I'm not going to sell the data publicly, right? I'm not going to post it. But somebody reaches out to you privately and goes, hey, I'll pay $1 million for that. Of course they're going to,
Why not?
Do it. Why not? They are financially motivated. That's why they do this in the first place.
Absolutely.
So I think that's a really, really good ad. So, all right, let's keep rocking and rolling. We're at 11:20. So next up, we wanted to talk about some of the Microsoft 2.0 stuff. Peter, really quickly, I know we've talked about the Microsoft Exchange stuff in the past, but will you just give us a quick brief on some of this?
Yeah, I mean, basically what you're getting at there is this fact that, as I was mentioning before, you can leverage external access, simple internet access to gain administrative access onto an Exchange server to then leverage a petit patin takeover to get into Microsoft. So basically, the whole point there is just that this is now one of the first times we've seen that that combined attack leveraged for ransomware deployment. And again, it should show that oftentimes people talk about these things and they say like, they look at them in isolation, or they think that they're too, as we mentioned in the previous discussions, they think that they're too sophisticated or sort of niche and are likely to be not likely to be taken or to be used by less sophisticated actors such as ransomware groups or something like that. But this is just another example of like, it doesn't matter if with the right incentives, with the right financial motivations, you're going to have attackers who find ways to combine these types of exploitations to get themselves full access into a network. And we've seen that right up front in our faces these last couple of months as companies that don't patch their systems rapidly enough are dealing with these hacks that happen in the span of hours, because they're able to go again from internet access to landing on an Exchange box to full domain admin and disseminating ransomware. So,
well, and I love that we can bring this full circle, right? Because you just said, hey, it's niche. We don't expect uneducated hackers to be able, or not uneducated, but maybe not the APT level groups to use this exploit. But then let's take that back to those medical pumps. They're saying the same thing. So at some point, guys, we got to help these organizations step up and patch these. And it's not even us as defenders, just like you said, Peter, it needs to be an IT and an industry-wide focus to get this patched. So now, as we've seen Lockbit be extremely successful, right? Even using these niche exploits, we're seeing a new ransomware gang. Joey, I'm going to kick it over to you. Talk to me about Hive Ransomware real quick.
Absolutely. Yeah, Joe, this pains me. Every time we come on this monthly podcast, there's always a new ransomware gang out there and doing something just slightly different. So yeah, what is Hive Ransomware? It's a new ransomware gang. What are they doing? Mostly the same stuff that you guys have been seeing before, right? This is phishing emails with malicious attachments. There's more heavy usage here of RDP. And the threat actors are probably looking at some of the after actions of some of the previous gangs here and being a little more diligent when they're actually executing their operations. And so, for example, here, they're actually searching for processes that do backups, file copying, and the security solutions on those endpoints. And they're using two different scripts here. There's a hive.bat script that they're deploying, and this performs a cleanup routine to actually remove itself in the Hive malware that's present on your computer when it does get infected. And there's also this shadow.bat script file that deletes actually the shadow copies in the system snapshots. And this is for, again, making it even more difficult, right, to recover your system post-compromise, right? So there was a ransomware gang just a few months ago that forgot to do these things, right? And so what we saw here is actually a lot of companies didn't end up paying out because backup systems were still intact. But this ransomware gang has actually learned from those mistakes and said, nope, we're going to go after those backup systems. So FBI released a flash report on the 25th of August. You can go check that out. And I want to offer some quick mitigations here. Microsoft's done a pretty good job, in my opinion, of some of the attack surface reduction rule set. So take a look at that. Also enabling ransomware protection on your box. But also, what's even really important after doing all that is making sure tamper protection is on. This allows it so the actual malware cannot turn off Windows Defender and actually remove those protections you have worked hard to put in place. And then finally, I can't believe I'm saying this in 2021, but do not allow RDP access from the web. If you're going to do RDP, be behind a VPN, be behind some sort of wall there, if you will. So yeah, pains you to say it, but we're back at it again with this ransomware gang. Joe, I think you're muted, man.
I know it pains you to say that, Joey, but like, it's real, guys. You should not. I know people are letting people in your organization who may have a valid business purpose RDP into your environment, and I've seen it when they're not on the VPN, right? So it comes back to, even if you're putting them on the VPN, you still need to do due diligence, because we talked a couple months ago about all these VPN exploits and vulnerabilities, right? So Absolutely. Even with a VPN, there could still be issues, but it helps mitigate a lot of those. And then, we talk about that, enable the ransomware protection, tamper protection. And now, just curious, because this is my noobness coming through a little bit, but tamper protection, I'm guessing you have to take that off to probably do some maintenance from time to time. So just make it part of your process and procedure. Joey, any thoughts on that?
No, absolutely. I mean, there's always going to be programs out there, line of business applications that may conflict with some of your security products. And we talked about this actually in the last podcast about not whitelisting full directories and some of the implications of that. So again, coming full circle with that. But again, have a process, have an SOP. If you're going to disable something for a time being so you can install an update, fine. But you have to make sure you put it back in line. Otherwise, security is not going to do its job.
I love it.
Yeah, and Joel, on that, I think probably the theme there is that we've seen this lolbins, living off the land is the way to go now. And so what attackers are doing, especially when in the context of ransomware, is they're leveraging things like WMI to shut down some of these services that then sort of bypasses the traditional shutdown mechanisms that then detections are leveraging to determine if an unauthenticated or unauthorized process is shutting down another process. They can detect it that way, but in this case, it's WMI. And so they're not able to stop that, or at least it's more difficult to stop. And so something I heard interestingly over the last few weeks is that the allow listing should kind of be a process here, is where there should, instead of this blanket, let's let everything do everything on a Windows system and then we'll lock things down as we need to, right? Blocking particular accesses and doing that. We should instead say no one can do anything on this system, and slowly start opening up holes to allow for certain processes certain authenticated processes to, say, use WMI instead of everything being able to use WMI. And now we detect on literally anything touching WMI except for the things that should be touching it. And this is definitely something we've seen in the last few years, is that especially with some of the partners we work with, is that things like PowerShell nowadays are like, if you execute PowerShell on target, you're going to get caught, because we've started to recognize that. And we kind of just have to start adopting that across the board, not just PowerShell, but all the other sort of sysinternals, if you will, that are leveraged to sort of avoid detections as these attackers, operate on their targets.
Yeah. Well, and so I think it's interesting, because when we were talking earlier about, Microsoft focusing on cloud, well, as they focus on cloud, if you spin up a cloud environment, it's least privilege already, right? You spin up a new VPC in AWS, like everything's locked down and you have to approve that. Isn't it so funny that on these on-prem services, though, it's the total opposite? I mean, it literally is, everything's turned on until you turn it off. It's a little mind-boggling that we're still at this place for on-prem services. So we promised you guys in our last podcast that we would pick back up on our Apple conversation. Let's jump right into it. Peter, let's talk about, let's pick right back up on the Apple conversation. We talked about them digging into your photos, looking at pictures in iCloud to look for potential child imagery in there. Now, we've since gotten more information, but Peter, kick us off. And then Joey, let's head over to you to discuss the video that Apple actually released on this.
Yeah, so I actually think this happened while Black Hat was going on, because if I remember correctly, we were in a talk, actually, as I got an alert on my phone and saw the news of it. And to be honest, I didn't think too much of it. And that's because my mind is probably for the worst. Like, I don't think about privacy or end user privacy the way that others may. And so it's not that I'm not a privacy advocate. It's just that my focus is typically much more on the security side and less so on the protecting user rights. And so when I saw this, I was excited to see this. But basically, Apple announced two things in tandem. They announced, number one, that they would be scanning for child pornography and other illegal images on devices. And then additionally, they also said that they would be implementing protections in iMessage to prevent minors from viewing sensitive photos, and then adding in controls that allow parents to be aware of that, and control how their users, how their children are using things like iMessage, because as we've known that grooming is a major issue here on social media platforms and on iMessaging, things like this. And so Apple felt that they needed to do something to help parents combat this. And so they kind of released these two things in tandem. And obviously there was lots of intermingling and sort of conflating of the two services and what's going on here, lots of confusion surrounding it, and ultimately you ended up with just a media firestorm of pushback against both of these security controls. And so ultimately, again, I'll kick it over to Joey for some details surrounding this and sort of parsing out the nuance, but ultimately you have just two very entrenched positions of one side saying this is absolutely necessary and is implemented correctly, and then the other side of the privacy-focused people saying this is an issue and is basically Apple, implementing a backdoor onto my cell phone, allowing foreign hostile governments to take action against dissidents that they don't choose, that they don't like, or giving them an opportunity to abuse this system to do that kind of thing. So lots of different arguments as to the concerns here, but I'll let Joey sort of parse out those nuances and talk to us about what really is going on.
Yeah, thanks, P. And I actually had the same sentiment you did when I first heard about this. I saw everyone else freaking out about it. I'm just like kind of surprised because Apple is a very big, one of their core features, one of their core things here is that they always talk about privacy and how they're privacy centric as a company. And so it kind of shocked me that they would do something perhaps so brazen here. So, I think one of the first things to note here is that technically Apple is not scanning for these images or not doing any image recognition on your iPhone when it comes to CSAM. But the objective here that Apple wanted to, and they kind of struggled with for the past few years, was how do we find illegal images of CSAM within iCloud? And to Joel's point, Wall Street Journal has a really great video on this in conjunction with Apple that they did. So take that, as you will, that kind of really explains the nuances of this even further and goes into it. But Joel, if you don't mind popping up that slide deck really quick, there's some acronyms we need to kind of define here. And one of the first being the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, right? They have an actual CSAM database, and CSAM is child sexual abuse material, right? So these are photos that we know have been circulated before on people's phones or on the web of actual child pornography. And we know those hashes, and companies like Facebook, Google, Microsoft, they also use this repo to scan for photos. And so something to note here is that Google, Facebook, and Microsoft are actually already scanning photos to match the repository of photos from the CSAM database, right? This is already happening on other sources that you already use. And so Apple wanted to really get ahead of this and kind of do this in your device as opposed to the cloud. And one of the techniques they do here, such as hashing, is something called a neural hash. And this is a perceptual hashing function. And so what is perceptual hashing? And this is basically the computation of basing the hash on features of an image as opposed to the precise values of pixels in an image, right? So if you're in cybersecurity, right, if you're in IT, you're very familiar with hashing and the notion that if you change one bit in an image or a file, the whole hash changes, right? But the objective here with perceptual hashing is even if an actor were to send around child pornography and alter that image a little bit, the neural hash of that new photo would actually stay the same. So let's take a look at this here at the bottom here. There's these two photos on the left-hand side and in the center. And these are pictures of a beach, right? And as you can see, the neural hash actually stays the same. It's because the neural hash takes into account the features of an image, not just the precise pixels of that image. And then you can see on the right-hand side, this picture of New York City is actually a different neural hash, right? So this is good, right? But we should also understand that there are some limitations with the neural hashing, right? And this is where I think a lot of the feedback has come from the security community and pricing community is that you can get into risk of colliding. And so, but Apple knew this going into that, right? So what actually needs to happen here is that even if you have a perceptual hash that matches, right? And if there were to be a collision, it is actually checked by a secondary system in the cloud. And then if there is an error, it's actually checked with a human moderator. So there's still a human in the loop. And I think it's really important to know. And also, this only happens when there's over 30 images that actually match these neural hashes. So you need 30 basically collisions to happen on a phone that gets sent to the cloud. And then there's still a human in the loop to actually ensure that this is actually a true positive, right, before it gets sent on to the authorities. So some things to note here when it comes to CSAM, other cloud services, like I mentioned before, actually looking at the photos and analyzing them. And furthermore, these are only if you're a customer of the iCloud photo library, which you don't have to be, right? You don't have to do that. Again, important to note that you have to basically have 30 known images before Apple flags your account. And we're not looking for they're not looking for photos of like your child in a bathtub. So I think that was something that was mentioned previously in some circulating news organizations. That's not the case, right? And again, these have to actually match the fingerprints of known CSAM material. So again, there's a lot of safeguards in here, and I think a lot of people caught emotion with the headlines being communicated. And moving to that second feature that Apple talked about, I won't dive too much into it, but this is where it's actually looking at the photos and doing image recognition on your phone. So that is the difference here. These are actually completely different technologies, right? CSAM technology in architecture is much different than this child protection feature of actually looking for pornography being sent to and from kids. And again, as a parent, you have to opt into this, right? And you have to opt into it on your device as well as your child's device here, in the sense that you have to enroll their account and be a monitor of that account. So yeah, I mean, it leaves the onus on parents. And so I think it's just very important that people dive into this. And if you really wanted to, there's a great white paper on Apple's website that actually dives into the CSAM the neural hashing technology and how they match this.
And I think that was a great explanation, Joey, because really, I mean, you think of a hash normally, you change 1 byte, you pad it with a 0, hash is completely different. But in this example, like, even if you manipulate the contrast, or I'm not a photo guy, but any of the other features of the photo, right, you can still extract that. And so that was a really, really good explanation. I guess I want, Peter, I'm putting you on the spot here a little bit, but devil's advocate on the flip side of things, is this a slippery slope? What else could they do with this that would be potentially an invasion of privacy? Is there anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, so I think that's a phenomenal question to ask, and is obviously what I think Apple very clearly asked themselves when they went through and designed this system. And that's really that's what I want to see when I see a system like this. I want to see the designers approach it with that exact question in mind. How do we build something that we know is ripe for exploitation, but we'll build it in a way that is not possible to be leveraged in this capacity? And so I think a couple things I want to highlight here are, number one, the major concern that lots of people had was the fact that the checking system that Joey is describing, that hash validation system, the first step of checking if these are matches, is actually taking place on the device. So people looked at that and said, oh my goodness, you're checking for things on my device. What are you doing on my device? And there was this immediate visceral reaction of that is an issue. That is a backdoor, if you will, for Apple to do things on my device. And so the idea there of exploitation is, if I'm a foreign government or if I'm a malicious actor, I can put something on your device, or I can alter the database that it is checked against to make you look and to incriminate you and put you in a bad position. And as a foreign government, I can illegally or pseudo legally take action against you. And that's the concern there. But really what's happening is the database is locked to just what is in. As Joey mentioned, I forget the acronym, Joey, help me out, the National Child Exploitation, yeah, you're muted, but yeah.
NCMEC.
NCMEC. So this database is actually the only one that can be loaded, and that is what's checked against on your device. And so, as Joey mentioned, again, it's not just looking for one hash, because they know that there can be collisions here. And additionally, if there is a single hash, it's still forwarded up, and it's still, that match is still made clear to Apple. But it takes 30 for them to actually take action. And then at that stage, again, there is further validation implemented in the cloud. So this is, first off, only taking place for over that database. So we only match against that controlled database input. And on top of that, further validation takes place once that image is updated or uploaded to the cloud. And then on top of that, after that second automatic hashing validation step takes place, there is a final human validation step that takes place before it ever reaches law enforcement. And so I think the level of controls that have been put in place mitigate virtually any concern for abuse due to the heavy amount of multiple technologies being used, multiple hashing systems being used. So if you find a collision in one, you're not going to find a collision in two. You can't have but it's incredibly unlikely that you're going to find a collision that happens to also collide on the second hashing validation system that Apple is doing in the cloud. And then furthermore, if that even were to happen, human validation occurs where they say, here is the known image that is an offending image, and here is the image that you have. Are they the same? Do you actually have a true match before even sending that on to law enforcement? So I think there are lots of steps in here that mitigate virtually any concern for abuse.
Well, and I think it's important for listeners, and I know we've come to time, so it's important for listeners to understand that Google used, for lack of better words, a supercomputer to cause hash collisions, right? And it takes a lot of effort to cause one hash collision. Making that sync with a second hash collision, we're talking, to make that even a viable method would be massive quantum computing. So I think just for your situational awareness, right now that is not a valid attack vector to have multiple collisions.
You could look at it as if somebody were breaking TLS. It's sort of like the same feat of you would have to have the ability to break TLS. And I think at that point, our concerns would be much, much greater than what is going on in iCloud child exploitation checking processes. If we had that capability to break two hash functions at once and create a collision like that, we would have bigger concerns that are much more widespread than just simply this application there too. So similar, I would equate it analogously to breaking of TLS.
Well, and so that's crazy because there was once a point in time where we said hashes will never, hash collisions will never happen. And now we're talking about double hash collisions never happening. So hopefully we're doing this long enough where maybe someday we'll see something like that happen, and it will be the evolution of TLS. So with that, Joey, and Peter, thank you so much for joining me today on September's Cyber Lookback. For those folks in the audience, thank you for joining us. Thank you for digging in. We look forward to seeing you on the first Thursday of next month for next month's IronNet's Cyber Lookback series. Thanks so much, and we hope you have a great rest of your day. See you, everybody.